Hey everybody, Joe Joseph here for thedailysheeple.com, and this is your news shot. Now this is going to be a pretty in-depth one because I want to articulate to everybody, and I promised you this is yesterday, and so here it is. The history of where we really went off the rails with regard to marijuana prohibition. And it even goes farther than that because it really encompasses the whole Controlled Substances Act. That's really the pivotal point in our nation's history where we committed ourselves to this war on drugs, if you will. Before that, it was primarily a propaganda campaign that took place that vilified marijuana and soon after other, what they say is drugs. Now, that's not to say that people can't get addicted. People do get addicted. There are two types of addiction, typically physiological addiction, psychological addiction. Those that are prone to psychological addictions need to be careful when you deal with substances, plants, herbs, anything that has a euphoric effect that you're not going to be using long term or don't have ready access to. You know, there are people that are physiologically addicted that are just because of necessity have to be on some of these things. Chronic pain patients are one of that. But marijuana doesn't create a physiological dependency. It just doesn't do that. There's no withdrawal symptoms from marijuana. Although, I mean, I have seen some people that are real aficionados when it comes to pot, but it doesn't work that way. But alcohol works that way. Your body actually changes its chemistry when over time, you become accustomed to drink and drink and drink. Next thing you know, you've got alcoholics that are drinking a liter of vodka a day and stuff like that. And if they go off it or don't have access to it, it'll kill them. Marijuana doesn't do that. It doesn't make people violent. There's no marijuana bar fights, if you will, or people that go down to the smoke shop and there's like all out brawls. Doesn't happen. The only thing that people want to do and typically when they smoke or, whatever, they're docile. It slows them down. It calms them down. Here we are giving children out there methamphetamine and amphetamines to for attention deficit disorder and ADHD. When marijuana, a derivative, who knows? Probably much better for ADHD. I know that it helps me focus, where before, my brain was like, would just never stop. Oftentimes, finding myself not able to fall asleep and having to go to Big Pharma for help. Now I don't have to do that. There's a history to this. And back in 2002, there was a report done that highlighted just where the roots of marijuana prohibition was and how it all started. And it really had to do with three things. It had to do with misinformation. It had to do with culture wars. And it had to do with prejudice. This is a CSDP research report. It says declassified Oval Office tapes from 1971 to 72. And of course, they're talking here about the Nixon tapes. Demonstrate that the foundation of marijuana criminalization is misinformation, culture war, and prejudice. The result of the newest set of tapes coincide with, at this time, the 30th anniversary of the National Commission on Marijuana and Drug Abuse, better known as the Schaefer Committee or Schaefer Commission. And of course, they're talking about Governor Raymond P. Schaefer of Pennsylvania. Now, he was appointed by President Nixon and highlights the discrepancies between what Nixon's personal agenda was and his commission's highly researched recommendations, because they were two totally different things. Now, the most important recommendation from the commission was decriminalization of possession and nonprofit transfer of marijuana, something that you're just now starting to see happen. Here in Massachusetts, as it stands right now, you can't go down to a dispensary and buy anything yet because the recreational dispensaries aren't open. The medical dispensaries are. You have to have a medical card. But you can, at this point in time, if you so choose, grow 6 plants for every adult in a household. So you don't have to necessarily go and buy it, if you will, because if you go and buy it and you don't have a medical card, it's illegal. But you can give it to people. So you can donate it to somebody else. You can do a not-for-profit transfer. And if you do it that way, it's legal. That's the law as it stands here today. Now, decriminalization, it says, meant there should be no punishment, criminal or civil, under state or federal law. Now, the day before the commission released its report, President Nixon told Bob Hadelman, quote, "We need," and I use the word, "all-out war on all fronts, have to attack on all fronts." The conversation went on to plan a speech about why Nixon opposed marijuana legalization and doing, quote, "a drug thing every week" during the 1972 presidential election year. Now, 1 year after Nixon's all-out war, marijuana arrests jumped over 100,000 to 427,000 people. And since the commission recommended marijuana offenses not to be a crime, from 2002, from 72 to 2002, 15 million people had been arrested as a result of petty drug crimes, or not even drugs, just marijuana, because we cannot classify marijuana as a drug. It is not. It's just not. It's an herb. It's a plant. It's no different than basil. It's just that simple. Now, just because it's psychoactive doesn't make it a drug. It's a plant. Now, the 30th anniversary of the Schaefer Commission was on March 22nd, 2002, when the Congress passed the Comprehensive Drug Abuse and Control Act of 1970. It created a presidential commission to report on the effects of marijuana and other drugs and recommended appropriate drug policies. Congress acknowledged it lacked reliable information about marijuana in particular and wanted the commission to advise it on where to place it in the Controlled Substances Act, as well as advise them on other marijuana policies. So it wasn't just the CSA, but they wanted to take it even deeper than that. So you can already see at this time that there is an agenda afoot. Now, President Nixon, of course, appointed Governor Raymond P. Schaefer of Pennsylvania, a former prosecutor known as a law and order governor, to head the commission. And the bipartisan panel included a congressman and a senator from each party, as well as 9 people appointed by Richard Nixon, including the dean of a law school, the head of a mental health hospital, and a retired Chicago police captain. Now, the Schaefer Commission conducted the most extensive and comprehensive examination of marijuana ever performed by the U.S. government up until that time. And even since then, there really hasn't been a deep dive into marijuana, or at least an acknowledged deep dive into marijuana, since the Schaefer Committee. There has been patents that have since come out by the Department of Health and Human Services, and the Veterans Administration has touted the benefits of marijuana to treat PTSD. But really, as far as a comprehensive, peer-reviewed body of research, this was really, and this is the only comprehensive review and research that's been done by the federal government into marijuana, because soon after it was classified Schedule 1. Now, in addition, they conducted separate surveys of opinion among district attorneys, judges, probation officers, clinicians, university health officials, and free clinic personnel, of course, because they're looking at more of the low income, because that is what they viewed at the time who did it, because, you know, your primary demographic of people that use marijuana, blacks and hippies. At that time, that's where Nixon's focus was, and that was who he considered his 2 biggest demographic challenges because of the Vietnam War and because of this newly launched drug war. And, soon after that, of course, in the 1980s, you had Gary Webb that came out and exposed the CIA shipping heroin into the neighborhoods of Los Angeles just for the express purpose of locking up minorities. That's exactly what it was all about. And it was exposed by Gary Webb. And then soon after, he's found committed suicide by a gunshot to the back of the head twice. He shot himself twice in the head. So obviously there's something a little more to that as well. They commissioned more than 50 projects ranging from a study of the effects of marijuana on man to a field survey of enforcement of marijuana laws in 6 metropolitan jurisdictions. Now, this inquiry focused on the American experience. However, the commission was well aware from the outset that the scope of marijuana use in the United States differed considerably from that in other countries where the drug had been used for centuries. Accordingly, the commission sought to put the American experience in perspective by seeing the situation firsthand in India and Greece, in North Africa, Jamaica, Afghanistan, and other countries. Now, this is where it gets kind of interesting because this was President Nixon's stance on the commission. Whenever you embark on research, before I get into President Nixon, the biggest thing that you have to do, if you're really true to finding the answer to what your question is, what you're trying to posit, you have to put all the biases aside, okay? You can't try to come to a conclusion and then back into it. That's not how it's supposed to work, okay? You're supposed to follow the truth wherever it takes you. Just like in journalism, research, journalistic research is no different than scientific research. And the same rules apply. Follow the truth because the truth is a story. The same thing should apply here as well. Follow the truth and we'll get to what we're trying to find out. And in this case, what should be the policy going forward? Okay, so knowing that, let's see if it's going to end up being positive or negative. Should it be illegal or legal? This is what President Nixon had to say about the National Commission. When President Nixon first heard that the commission was going in the decriminalization direction, he warned Governor Schaefer, this is in the Nixon tapes, stating this, quote, "You're enough of a pro to know for you to come out with something that would run counter to what the Congress feels and what the country feels and what we're planning to do would make your commission just look bad as hell." Nixon urged Schaefer, quote, "Keep your commission in line." Nixon also urged Schaefer to go to Hugh, and that, of course, is the U.S. Department of Health, Education, and Welfare, describing them as, quote, "a bunch of muddle-headed psychiatrists who let their hearts run their brains, and it should be the other way around." It is worth noting that at this time, Governor Schaefer was also being considered for a federal judgeship, an appointment he never received, by the way. But that carrot that dangled out there just so much to be able to sway the commission. Now, Nixon also explained that the image of the commission is important. This, again, taken from the Oval Office tapes, September 9th, 1971. Quote, "You see, the thing that's so terribly important here is that it not appear that the commission's frankly just a bunch of do-gooders. I mean, they say they're a bunch of old men who don't understand. That's fine. I wouldn't mind that. But if they get the idea you're just a bunch of do-gooders that are going to come out with a, quote, soft on marijuana report, that'll destroy it right off the bat. I think there needs to come out with a report that's totally oblivious to some obvious differences between marijuana and other drugs, other dangerous drugs. There are differences. And also that you don't go into the matters of penalty and that sort of thing as to whether there should be uniformity in penalties, whether in courts. I'd much rather have uniformity than diversity, but different approaches." So you can see how this is going on. And President Nixon let Schaefer know that he was strongly against marijuana legalization, saying that he, quote, very strongly feels on marijuana the best final analysis that you start down that road. Once you start down that road, the chances of going further down that road are greater. I'm aware some disagree with that. So instantly he knew that the commission was going down the road of decriminalization, but he didn't want that. What he wanted was a uniformity of policy across all of it. He wanted it to be considered just as dangerous as any of the most dangerous drug out there. Now, they also discussed whether the commission would recommend legalization of marijuana. Schaefer acknowledged that there were some commissioners who favored legalization, but they were seeking, basically, they wanted to remain anonymous. Or not anonymous, I should say. They wanted unanimity. So they wanted to say, okay, we're going to be a unified voice. Whether it's down the road of legalization or not, we have to come to a unified decision. Egil Crow asked him directly, Schaefer, if the commission is supporting legalization. Listen to this. This is, again, in the Nixon tapes. Crow said, so far, you're staying away from any possible endorsement of legalization of marijuana. Schaefer says, absolutely, absolutely. Nixon said, I would keep in mind that you would run too strongly against the public tide, but suppose it ought to be done. Well, Schaefer says, I understand that. So even at the time, the public did not want marijuana illegal. And it goes on to say, Schaefer says, or actually Nixon said, you just have a great problem here. And Schaefer says, well, we have 4 congressmen on the commission, 2 Republicans, 2 Democrat, and at least one of the opposition would like to take over. And he goes on to say that we've prevented that. He says, I think that we've got the commission moving in the right direction. Now, notice, not following the truth. They've come to a conclusion, and now they're backing into it. That's what this whole thing ended up being, because the research totally went in an opposite direction of where they wanted to go. Now, on President Nixon and his opinion, his personal belief on marijuana, it goes on to say one of the primary goals of the Schaefer Commission was to separate myth from fact. The commission noted that, quote, recognizing the extensive degree of misinformation about marijuana as a drug, we've tried to demythologize that. Viewing the use of marijuana in its wider social context, we've tried to desymbolize it. But the Nixon tapes they paint a different picture, because it's evident that the president believed many of the myths about marijuana and tied it very closely to blacks, to Jews, and to the counterculture, or hippies. And Nixon wasn't concerned with correcting misinformation. His view regarding education and educating the public on marijuana was, enforce the law, you've got to scare the hell out of them. Now, after a lengthy process of taking testimony, surveying the public, and reviewing the commission appointed by Nixon, they concluded this, quote, the most notable statement that can be made about the vast majority of marijuana users, experimenters, and intermittent users is that they are essentially indistinguishable from their non-marijuana using peers by any fundamental criterion other than their marijuana use. Let me stop there. I'm going to say that one more time. This is what the Schaefer Commission concluded. The most notable statement that can be made about the vast majority of marijuana users, experimenters, and intermittent users is that they are essentially indistinguishable from their non-marijuana using peers by any fundamental criterion other than their marijuana use. That's off of page 41 of the National Commission on Marijuana and Drug Abuses report. What does that say? Because we all know that in the greater context, in today's world, It's a commonly known thing that everybody does it, but nobody talks about it. Now, more people are talking about it, but at the time, and especially in states where it's more illegal or, the penalties are more severe, everybody did it. Nobody talked about it. I will go on the record to tell you right now that if the federal government tested their civil servants and held them to the policy that they claim to maintain and adhere to, that this government would be thrown into immediate crisis, that it could not maintain critical function because of the substance abuse problems that plague the federal government. I can tell you that as an absolute certainty. You want to call me a whistleblower, I don't care. That is a 100% truth. Now, if you want me to quantify it, I probably couldn't quantify it, but I would probably wager to say that at least 1 in 4 have a problem. Or not so much a problem, because I don't view it as a problem, but the government has a problem. Because if they were to just one day indiscriminately just go boop and P-test everybody, there would be a national crisis because a lot of functions of the federal government would come to a grinding halt if they were to follow that policy. That is what is so egregious about all of this, is that it just, here you have a holier than thou entity telling you you can't do this and pushing prohibition, and meanwhile, all of them are doing it. They're all doing it. And if it's not pot, maybe it's heroin. If it's not that, they're snorting coke. And if it's not that, they're on freaking Adderall. And if it's not that, then they're freaking boozers. And everybody said, wow, alcohol's legal. Yeah, okay, it's legal. Everything in moderation, and I get it. Nothing should be illegal. But if you're going to hold people to standards, then it has to be uniform across the board. And it's clearly not. Now, President Nixon, speaking to Bob Haldeman in the Oval Office 1 month after he told his National Commission would urge the decriminalization, he had a different agenda. Listen to this, quote, "I want a goddamn strong statement about marijuana." He goes on to say, can I get that out of this son of a bitching domestic council? I mean, one on marijuana that just tears the ass out of them. See, you can see the level of, he's just an unbelievable psychopath. I really can't. Nixon was off his rocker. Just unbelievable. And this guy, leader of the free world. Yeah, right. Yeah, sure. Yeah. Now, regarding leading to other drug use, in a conversation with Art Linkletter, President Nixon said this, quote, "But believe me, it's true. The thing about the drug, once people cross that line from the unintelligible straight society to the drug society, it's a very great possibility that they're going to go further." Stop there. This is where the stepping stone drug thing comes into play. See, that was the straight out of the imagination of President Nixon, a psychopath, a guy that was should have belonged in the tune bin, to be honest with you. And here we have how many people today that parrot that same thing that says, oh, yeah, marijuana leads to using higher, heavier drugs. No, it doesn't. It doesn't do it. And there is no scientific finding to support that. That came straight from the imagination of President Nixon himself. And in the same conversation, Nixon compared alcohol to marijuana, claiming marijuana smokers, quote, consume smoke to get high while persons drink to have fun. Nixon also saw marijuana leading to loss of motivation and discipline, but claimed, quote, at least with liquor, I don't lose motivation. Now, if you want to find this fun conversation, you can find it in two places. I'm sorry, one place. And that's the Oval Office tape from May 18th, 1971, 12:16 p.m. to 12:35 p.m. And that's a conversation with Art Linkletter and Devan Shumway and Oliver Atkins. See, this is all on tape. And what happened was, when this report came out, it got put in the National Archive and buried. And the Nixon tapes are available. All you got to do is listen. Folks, it's a treasure trove of stuff, but this is where this psychotic drug policy came from. The marijuana issue also played into culture wars of the time. President Nixon saw a connection between civil rights and anti-war demonstrators and marijuana use, even though the Schaefer Commission tried to minimize the differences in lifestyle and the effect of marijuana on social order. Nixon discussed this with entertainer Art Linkletter, claiming, quote, "Radical demonstrators that were here 2 weeks ago, they're all on drugs, virtually all of them." Another area where President Nixon and the expert commission he appointed disagreed was whether marijuana was leading to the downfall of the United States. The Schaefer Commission noted, quote, "It's unlikely that marijuana will affect the future strength, stability, or vitality of our social and political institutions." But Nixon, on the other hand, repeatedly claimed that marijuana use would lead to the downfall of the United States, unlike drinking, which is used in strong countries like Russia, England, and Ireland. Do you hear the logic? Well, it's hard to call it logic because there is no logic here. Nixon claimed that nations had not been destroyed by alcohol, but an awful lot of nations have been destroyed by drugs. In another conversation, he linked drug use, homosexuality, and immorality to the downfall of great countries, concluding, "You see, homosexuality, dope, immorality in general, these are the enemies of strong societies, and that's why the communists and the left-wingers are pushing the stuff. They're trying to destroy us." Now, I will go on to say that in the context of agendas to dumb down America and promote a communist ideology in this country, that is absolutely correct. It's happened for a long time. And does immorality do that? Yes. I mean, it's been a pivotal. Removing God from society has been awful as far as its effect on American society. But I'm not talking about from a church perspective, having to go sit in a pew on Sunday, because that has nothing to do with it. Where it really comes into play is where people put their faith. Do you put their faith in yourself and your faith in the Creator, whoever you worship, or do you put your faith in the government God? Because that's been where they've wanted the power and the focus to be. They want people to cede their power to the government and then rely on the government God to take care of their every need. That's been an agenda for quite some time. Now, the marijuana debate also played into Nixon's prejudices, and he had extensive. This guy was as racist as you could get, especially against Jews. And in a conversation with Bob Hadelman, this is what Nixon had to say. He said, "I see another thing in the news summary this morning about it. That's a funny thing. Every one of the bastards that are out for legalizing marijuana is Jewish. What the Christ is the matter with the Jews, Bob? What's the matter with them? I suppose it's because most of them are psychiatrists, you know. There are so many. All the greatest psychiatrists, why, they're Jewish. By God, we're going to get hit with this marijuana thing, and I want to hit it right square in the puss. I want to find a way of putting more on that." So that is a direct quote from President Nixon, and you can find that quote on Oval Office tape May 26, 1971. And that's approximately at 10:05 a.m. See, his psychosis actually led to some of the best record keeping I've ever seen. I mean, this is unbelievable. When you listen to these conversations, and again, if you go to the National Archive, you can listen to all this. It's amazing. Now, the impact today, this is the CHBP. They say this was the impact. The marijuana issue continues to be hotly debated today. Unfortunately, many of the myths about marijuana put forward by Nixon continue to be stated today as if they were incontrovertible truths. The conclusion of the Schaefer Commission rings true today. And this is their conclusion, quote, that some of these original fears were unfounded and that others were exaggerated has been clear for many years. Yet many of these early beliefs continue to affect contemporary public attitudes and concerns, unquote. The impact, though, of marijuana laws has grown. And we've seen that in the amount of arrests for marijuana, 80% for possession. From 72 to 2000, you had 13.265 million Americans arrested on marijuana charges. Countless families have been destroyed by marijuana enforcement. And to what end? You know, the marijuana laws haven't prevented nearly 80 million people at that time in 2002 from trying marijuana, nor have they prevented marijuana from becoming the most valuable cash crops in many states. Voters in 8 states as of 2002 had voted for medical marijuana laws by large majorities. And of course, we know now that over half the country have legalized it in some way, shape, or form, and many others are going to follow suit. Yet the marijuana wars are getting more aggressive under the current presidential administration. The DEA is in the process of trying to ban hemp foods, and even if they have no intoxicating effect. And they're using law enforcement resources at a time when they say an international war against terrorism is a top priority. But they go ahead and they use resources to raid a medical dispensary in California. Or, you know. So that's why when Attorney General Jeff Sessions did what he did, it's so egregious. You know, here you say that we have so many other problems to contend with. And you're going after people that just want to go watch movies and eat Doritos all day. It's crazy. Now, at the same time, the Schaefer Commission reported to the U.S., the Bain Commission reported to Holland with similar recommendations. The Dutch followed the advice of their experts, and 30 years later, their marijuana use rate is half of what the U.S. is. And by the way, their hard drug use rates are even lower, and they spend less on law enforcement and incarceration and have less problems related to drug use. The Dutch have proven the Schaefer Commission was right. Indeed, most of Europe is going Dutch. The Nixon marijuana war approach has been tried for over 4 decades now. Perhaps it's time to try and follow the recommendations of the Schaefer Commission and reform the marijuana laws and decriminalize possession and legalize sale. You know, I don't see what the hell the problem is with that. Yet here we are today fighting, yet again, prohibition. And folks, let me tell you something. It shouldn't end with simply marijuana. The government has no place in telling you what you can and cannot put in your body. But it's up to you to educate yourself and to do the research into it to ensure that you're making the best decision for you. And if it's the best decision for you and that's what you want to do, knock yourself out. That's all I have to say about that. But my friends, that is the true history of marijuana illegalization, if you will, and demonization and prohibition. And it was really at its root based in prejudice, misinformation, and agendas. It's what it was all about. Certainly not grounded in science. Now, I want to go over one time some highlights of the Schaefer Commission findings. And you can go on Amazon.com and get the National Commission on Marijuana and Drug Abuse's report called A Signal of Misunderstanding. I'll give you just a couple of highlights. First one, no significant physical, biochemical, or mental abnormalities could be attributed solely to marijuana smoking. This off of page 61. Page 36. No valid stereotype of marijuana users or non-users can be drawn. Page 42. Young people who choose to experiment with marijuana are fundamentally the same people, socially and psychologically, as those who use alcohol or tobacco. Page 88. No verification is found of a causal relationship between marijuana use and subsequent heroin use. Page 96. Most users, young and old, demonstrate an average or above average degree of social functioning, academic achievement, and job performance. Page 73. In sum, the weight of the evidence is that marijuana does not cause violent or aggressive behavior. If anything, marijuana serves to inhibit the expression of such behavior. Page 75. In short, marijuana is not generally viewed by participants in the criminal justice community as a major contributing influence in the commission of delinquent or criminal acts. Page 78. Neither the marijuana user nor the drug itself can be said to constitute a danger to public safety. Page 79. Recent research has not yet proven that marijuana use significantly impairs driving ability or performance. Page 84. No reliable evidence existing indicating that marijuana causes genetic defects in man. And finally, page 130, and this is over a 200-page report, marijuana's relative potential harm to the vast majority of individual users and its impact on society does not justify a social policy to seek out and firmly punish those who use it. Decriminalize it. It's really that simple. Apply a modest tax and let's get out of the hole. If that's the way they want to run it, if that's our path to get there, then let's get there, and then we work on it from there. The founding fathers, when looking at things like this, were very, you can look back at it as a great example of how to handle things like this, how to handle things like 9/11. When you want to get to the truth, people need to put agendas, worldviews, and biases aside, come together, and follow the truth wherever it takes them. And once they get there, then, and only then, do you debate your differences. Do you debate the difference of opinion, which direction you want to go? But you can't back into the evidence. The evidence has to take you to the conclusion. And the conclusion here is clear. Marijuana should not, nor have ever been, illegal, and the millions of people that have been put in prison for the possession and use of marijuana and their families have been irreparably harmed over the past 4 decades. And unless we fix that egregious act, these crimes against humanity will continue unabated. I'm Joe Joseph. This was thedailysheeple.com's News Shot. Feel free to comment below and visit our website at thedailysheeple.com. #WakeTheFlockUp. Have a great day, everybody.